All right, so you want to build a delivery plan using your estimates. How do you do that? That's all this episode is about. Let's dive in. Now, it's not a complex process. Don't get overwhelmed, but it does have a number of input parameters. So, a couple of steps you're already familiar with, which is determining the raw scope, which is essentially sizing your entire backlog, or at least a good cross section of it, the minimum that you would like to size, and it could be with a whole bunch of assumptions laid onto it, is what you want to deliver as part of your first release. You also want to do your raw velocity exercise, which we've spoken about in a previous episode. Now, once you've done that, you want to get a sense of how much risk and uncertainty is associated with the scope that you've estimated. Now, one of the techniques that we do use across multiple projects is what we call the CVC technique, which is complexity, volatility, and completeness. Now, there's a notion of complexity that does get attached to your estimate of the story as well, but it's well worth noting down how complex the story is. Is it simple? Is it standard? Or is it really complex? Because if it is really complex, then there's a likelihood that a really complex could become a really, really complex story. And so there's some risk associated with it. You also want to understand how likely is this requirement to change, which is the volatility of the requirement. Again, is it low, medium, high? And last but not the least, you want to get a sense of how complete is your understanding of the requirements. Sometimes all you know is one line, but you might uncover other requirements for that particular feature as you go down the whole implementation path. And in case there are more unknowns, then in that case, there's a certain additional risk with each requirement. So now you apply your CVC parameters to every single story. And then after eyeballing the overall profile of your backlog, you can build a notion of how comfortable, how confident you are about the estimates associated with the entire backlog. You don't need to make this into an exact science. You don't even need to create a formula in a spreadsheet, though you're more than welcome to do so. This kind of an assessment gives you an overall gut feeling based on your experience as to how you're going to assess the risk of your requirements. All right, so you've done that, you've built a risk profile, then you need to build a developer capacity plan. What's a developer capacity plan? Very simply put, it's a notion of how much are you expecting developers to contribute every sprint. Now, people are going to take holidays, people are probably going to fall sick, heaven forbid, but they will. And there are going to be trainings, there are going to be company events, and with all of that put together, you're not going to be firing at 100% all throughout. Remember, we said the raw velocity is a very ideal concept. So you're going to have to reduce your raw velocity based on people's availability. And that's what you get to know from your developer capacity plan. Also, do remember everyone's not going to join the project on day one. You're probably going to have some work that a small number of people need to do to start off the project, and then more people can join in when the project is in flight, and then you probably need to taper it down later down the line, right? So you've got to make that plan, and accordingly, you're going to have to adjust for that dev capacity. And that is exactly the next step, which is that when you have lower capacity, you're going to have to reduce the velocity. And when you have higher capacity, you're going to have to increase the velocity. The other thing to consider is that there are certain events like releases or UATs, which will take away from your team's capacity. And that will also mean that your velocity has an impact. Based on all of this, you will arrive at a number of iterations that it needs for you to then deliver the project. You prepare the project timeline, you finalize all the resources that you need, not necessarily people because you've already factored that in already, but you're probably going to need other resources such as servers, you're going to need stuff to get provisioned, environments set up, and all of those resource plans need to be accounted for before you publish the final plan. Simple? Probably not. Complex? Maybe not so much. Lots of inputs? Yes, absolutely. And that's why we have multiple practices to try and resolve for all of the questions that we're trying to answer as part of the plan exercise. All right. So you know what goes in to creating a project plan. In the last episode, which is the next one, I will show you how to build out that project plan, and you'll get a sense of what it could actually look like through a very simple spreadsheet template. So I'll see you in that next one. Until then, take care.